We've reached that point in the quarter where I'm mostly caught up or slightly ahead of my goals for all of my drafting and typing and editing. And now it's time for me to start in on those yellow ones, the plotting. And now I'm going to take you with me. Hi, my name is Dawn Dalton. I am a freelance writer and an author, and today I want to talk about my plotting process. Now, if you had asked me a few years ago about plotting, I would have proudly proclaimed that I am a pantser, that I don't plot my books, that I just let the process happen organically, and I never finished a book. Now, that is not to say that pantsing is not still part of my process or that you can't pants your book. But for me, pantsing generally means that I don't finish. So we're about to start in on Picking Up the Pieces, which is book 4 of my House That Gaming Built series. And I thought I would talk about how I came to enjoy plotting and how I still use pantsing in my process. So let's start. I have always told myself stories. This is something, if you asked my sister, you asked my parents, I was always telling stories, always playing with my dolls. My sister used to say that if I was left alone with 2 clothespins, that I would, by the end of the day, have backstories for both of them, be able to tell them apart, and have an entire world built around it. That's still true, except obviously I don't use clothespins. I write everything down. Everyone talks about the hero's journey as sort of the way stories are structured, and it never resonated with me in the this is how my story should be structured, because I write romance, and the way the hero's journey is written doesn't lend itself to romance very well. And so I would pants my stories, writing random bits here and there, and never finishing anything, with the exception of the book I wrote in high school, which was crap. I can tell that I knew nothing when I wrote that book, and one of these days I feel like it needs a redemption arc, but not today. It wasn't until I started reading all the books on the craft that I managed to find Romancing the Beat. And this thing is skinny, but is fundamentally the book that has changed how I write. It breaks down romance novels into 4 sections. And I know I've talked about this before, but today I'm going to go through the first section while plotting out book 4 and show you how it actually works. So, section 1 is the setup. It has the introduction 1, introduction 2, the meet cute, the no way, and the adhesion plot thrust. Now, that's a lot of words that don't really tell you anything. So let's start. Introduction 1, Andrew, the last of the single people in the house that gaming built, because this is the last book in the series, I think. He is looking for a way to move out of the house. He's had a lot of money saved up. He has a good paying job. And his sister calls him to see if he can take his niece Holly to go to story time at the library. Andrew loves Holly. Holly's just the most awesome little kid ever. And he agrees because he actually has the day off of work. That's his introduction. That's how you get to know Andrew. Introduction 2, Michaela. Michaela is an assistant at the library who runs story time. We can see how the next part's gonna work out. She is also an artist who does ceramics, who wants to do that full time and is working to build her business. But in the meantime, she needs to make some money. So she works at the library. Part 3, Meet Cute. Story time at the library, where Andrew brings Holly. And Michaela says something to Holly about her dad, meaning Andrew, to which Holly gets to say, he's not my daddy, he's my Andrew. And there is that moment of, like, they kind of are interested in the other person, but obviously he needs to get Holly home. No Way 1, which is the section that I always forget to put in, except it's still kind of in my books anyway. No Way 1. This will be the second or third time that he takes Holly to story time. They stay after to help clean up after whatever activity is done, and he asks Michaela out, and she has to refuse because the library has a no fraternization rule for the people in her position. Section 5, Adhesion. They're gonna both end up at the game hut for a board game day, and they get to find out that the other one actually likes board games, and they spend the day playing games together, talking, getting to know each other, and they go out to dinner. Because what the library doesn't know isn't going to hurt Michaela. And that is my adhesion for the story. The two of them going out to dinner. That is the first section of the book. That's like theoretically a quarter of the story right there. I mean, in actuality, it's not, because the introduction usually takes less time than everything else. Now, when I go to plotting, most of the time I've already gotten bits of the story written down because I do a lot of idea iteration ahead of time, trying to figure out who these characters are, the snippets of stories that have come to me before I get to the meat and potatoes of writing my story. Most of the time I have a couple thousand words of randomness that may or may not end up in my story. With the first of the call signs book, I'm actually highlighting the stuff as I'm using it, just to see what can be reused in other books, because some of it can be reused in other books. Moving on to section 2, I'm not going to give you guys all the spoilers for these books. Section 2 is called Falling in Love. It starts with No Way 2. The inkling that this could work. Their deepening desire. Maybe this will work. And the midpoint of love. That should put you about halfway through the book. Should. Most of the time I'm right about there. Sometimes I'm a little bit early and the end of the book takes a little bit longer, but it's a good indication that I'm on the right track. Section 3, The Retreat from Love. It's the inkling of doubt, the deepening doubt, the retreat, the shields up, the breakup. Now, this doesn't actually have to be a breakup. There are a lot of romance novels out there that don't have a third act breakup scene. There's just something that happens that pulls them apart. I did that with my werewolf book, Broken, where she gets stolen. Not that they break up, she gets taken. So there is a lot of times where you don't actually have to break them up, but let's be honest, it's just easier that way. And the final section, Fighting for Love. This is the dark night of the soul. I screwed up by breaking up with this person. Then you have the wake up / catharsis. The grand gesture, this would be Mr. Darcy's confession of love. The letter that he gives Elizabeth. What wholehearted feels like. This is meeting in the field for Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth. This is them going to her father and admitting their feelings for each other. And then you have the epilogue, just the cleanup of everything, tying up of loose ends. And for me, being able to do this really has changed how I write my books. Now, obviously, this isn't every scene that's going to end up in my book. That's about 20,000 words-ish, if I'm lucky. But it also gives me a structure to which I can adhere the rest of the scenes for my novels. The other thing I like to do when I'm doing all of this plotting is, obviously, I'm also taking notes about my characters. I'm making sure that, especially because this is the last book in the series, that I have what Andrew looks like nailed down and refer to it repeatedly, because he cannot change from having whatever color hair to having like bright orange hair, unless there's a scene where he dyes it or somebody mentions it. Eyes don't change color. In fact, it was one of those things when I went to go start this story and I realized that I wanted him to have a niece. I had to go back and put her in book 3. I had to mention the fact that his niece Holly, because I can't have a kid come out of nowhere. I mean, I could, but it's more believable when they're mentioned in prior books. That's kind of how I go about writing my stories. My biggest fear when I started plotting is that it would take all the spontaneity out of my writing, that all of a sudden it would just be boring and drag, and there'd be no excitement, no mystery for me, and I would just get bored. And so far, that hasn't been the case. I still have moments where I'm like, oh, I didn't even notice that. Oh, I didn't even realize that about this character until I'm writing it. And I will go off script. Don't get me wrong. There are times where I've had to replot whole chunks of books because something happens and I'm like, that makes more sense than this other thing. I hope you've enjoyed this small look into sort of my plotting process and how I utilize the beat sheet from Romancing the Beat in plotting out my novels. If you've enjoyed this, be sure to feed the algorithm, boop that like button, and subscribe. And I will see you next time.